I'm Sharon Eliashiv-Barad. This presentation will assist you in the preparation of a food contact notification known as an FCN and provide background information on food contact substances and specific information and recommendations on the submission of notifications for such substances. The Office of Food Additive Safety, or OFAS, in FDA's Center of Food Safety and Applied Nutrition in College Park, Maryland, is responsible for the evaluation of scientific data and other information submitted in support of the safe use of various food substances. Within OFAS, the Division of Food Contact Notifications is responsible for administering the FCN program for the pre-market review of industry submissions of new components and uses of food contact materials. I encourage you to contact FDA should you have any questions, comments, or requests for information and/or clarification. This slide shows an outline of the topics that are covered in this presentation. First, I'll provide background information on the FDA Modernization Act of 1997. Next, I will discuss various aspects of the FCN program, including the scope, information available on the web, including guidance documents, inventories, and information on the format and submission of an FCN, and FDA actions both during and after the review period. I will conclude the presentation with a brief discussion on pre-notification consultations and Freedom of Information Act requests. Much of the information that I will cover in this presentation is also available online at the FDA website, www.fda.gov, under the section entitled Food Contact Substances. FDA encourages you to review the information on our website prior to engagement on this topic. The FCN program was promulgated by the FDA Modernization Act of 1997. FDAMA established the FCN program as the preferred method to achieve pre-market clearance of what used to be termed indirect additives, but was now folded into a broader term of food contact substances, or FCSs. Compared to the food additive petition process, the FCN process is more streamlined and has several important attributes. Specifically, an FCN approval is proprietary to the manufacturer or supplier listed in the effective FCN. An FCN is maintained as confidential during the review period, but non-confidential material is releasable if an agency action occurs on the submission, and submission actions must be completed in a 120-day review period. Importantly, the safety standard defined under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act remains unchanged. As defined in 21 CFR Section 170.3i, that is, the reasonable certainty of no harm. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act defines an FCS as any substance that is intended for use as a component of materials used in manufacturing, packing, packaging, transporting, or holding food if the use is not intended to have any technical effect in such food. A food contact material or article may be composed of one or more FCSs. The newly termed food contact substance is much broader than our previously used term of indirect additive and encompasses food additives, generally recognized as safe substances, and prior sanctioned substances. As aforementioned, many food additives that fit the definition of FCS used to be known as indirect additives and are so codified in 21 CFR Sections 174 through 179. There are many examples of FCSs, several of which are shown on this slide. It is important to note that the definition of an FCS includes both polymers, typically the food additive, as well as the starting monomer or monomers. Other types of materials that are traditionally seen in this arena include coatings on paper and metal, paper and polymer additives, adhesives, ion exchange resins, and food processing equipment. Should you find yourself questioning the regulatory authority of a substance, please be sure to contact FDA. The next few slides describe who may submit an FCN, when an FCN or food additive petition should be submitted, when more than one FCN is required, who may rely on an effective FCN, and when an existing authorized FCS may require the submission of a new FCN. When determining the applicability of an FCS, the first question is often, who may submit an FCN? This is clearly defined in the law that a manufacturer or supplier of an FCS or an agent may submit to FDA a notification for a new use of an FCS. Regarding the term supplier, this has been interpreted to mean any person supplying the FCS, including a company supplying the FCS to themselves for manufacture of a food contact material. The next question when planning for use of a new material is when should an FCN be submitted? By law, FCNs are only required for new uses of FCSs that are food additives. Examples of situations when a new FCN may be required include the use of an unapproved FCS, an approved FCS with a modification of use, a new manufacturing process, or new or different manufacturer or supplier. Although a notification is not required for an FCS that is generally recognized as safe or prior sanctioned for its intended use in contact with food, manufacturers may choose to submit an FCN to notify FDA of new uses for such FCSs. Although an FCN is the preferred route for approval, FDA still has the option to require a food additive petition in some instances. These instances are described in 21 CFR section 170.100C and include cases where the new use of the FCS will increase the cumulative dietary concentration to greater than or equal to 1 part per million, or in the case of a biocide, to a level of 200 parts per billion, or when there exists a bioassay on the FCS that the agency has not reviewed and the study is not clearly negative for carcinogenicity. Now you may ask yourself, when is one or multiple notifications required? As illustrated on this slide, one FCN should be submitted when there is only one FCS that is a food additive. For example, consider a new polymer that is manufactured with a new catalyst. The polymer is the food additive, while the catalyst is an FCS that has no technical effect in the finished polymer. On the other hand, multiple FCNs should be submitted when more than one of the FCSs are food additives that are not permitted for the intended use. For example, consider a new polymer that is blended with an antioxidant that was not previously authorized for use in the polymer. The antioxidant is an FCS, but it is also a food additive as it has an intended technical effect in the polymer. Next, you may ask who may rely on an effective FCN. Since an FCN is effective only for the manufacturer, substance, and intended use identified in the notification, any person wishing to rely on an effective FCN generally will need to demonstrate that the FCS being marketed has been manufactured or supplied by the manufacturer identified in the effective FCN, and that the FCS is being used under the conditions that are the subject of that effective notification. Sometimes, during the course of product use, a new notification may need to be submitted, although an effective FCN already exists. There are numerous situations when a notifier should submit a new notification for an already effective FCS and use. For example, if substantive changes are made to an effective FCN, including changes in the manufacturer, manufacturing process, identity of the FCS and/or impurities and impurity levels, and changes to the specifications, limitations, and conditions of use. If new data become available to FDA warranting consideration that the intended use of the FCS is unsafe, then a new FCN may need to be submitted to allow for such a review. The next section of this presentation provides an introduction to available guidance, inventories, submission format, and forms related to the FCN program, which can be found on FDA's website at www.fda.gov. Click on the Food link, then under the Program heading, select Food Ingredients and Packaging. Under the Program's Area heading, select Food Contact Substance. This will direct you to the Food Contact Substance page, where you will find links to various useful FCN documents and other related information. Anyone submitting notifications to FDA should familiarize themselves with our guidance documents, beginning with the administrative guidance. This document covers many of the topics already highlighted in this presentation, such as the scope of the FCN program and the format of an FCN, but also includes information on electronic submissions, disclosable information in an FCN, FDA's response to an FCN, the withdrawal of an FCN without prejudice, determination that an FCN is no longer effective, pre-notification consultations, and the format of a notification for food contact substance formulations. The chemistry guidance details information recommended to confirm the identity, manufacture of, and impurities in the FCS, proposed use, intended technical effect, stability, migration levels in food, including migration testing and analytical methods, and consumer exposure. The toxicology guidance pairs the exposure estimates for the FCS and any other substances with recommended safety testing. This document provides guidance on the format of summarizing the information regarding the safety of the FCS, and also more detailed summaries on the individual substances in what are referred to as the safety narrative and comprehensive toxicology profile, respectively. In addition, guidance is provided on consideration or evaluation of the migrants with structural similarity to known toxicants, as well as additional toxicological considerations. Since all FDA actions also require that FDA comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, FCNs also have an environmental review component. The environmental guidance details the requirement that FCNs must include either an environmental assessment, also known as an EA, or a claim of categorical exclusion from the requirement of an EA. The environmental guidance addresses how to determine if your FCS is categorically excluded and how to prepare an EA when necessary. To assist in this effort, FDA also provides an inventory of environmental decisions for effective FCS notifications on the web that can be used as a resource to anyone submitting an FCN. In addition to the inventory of environmental decisions for effective FCS notifications, FDA maintains several inventories to assist stakeholders in preparing an FCN or determining if a use is previously authorized. These include the inventory of effective FCNs, the list of food types and conditions of use for FCSs, which defines several classifications used in specifying the use of an FCS, a cumulative exposure database, the list of threshold of regulation exemption requests, and a list of indirect additives and their applicable regulations. In order to submit a complete FCN, FDA requires notifiers to submit Form 3480. This form consists of several sections. Section 1 is for administrative information, and sections 2 through 5 are for technical information. The form should be placed at the beginning of any FCN submission to ensure that the FCN is complete and the review of the FCN will be efficient. The FDA sees the use of this form beneficial since it organizes the FCN and assists both the notifier and the FDA reviewers in determining what the necessary data are for reviewing the safe use of the substance. The form contains empty fields for inputting the information required in an FCN. However, there is often not enough space to enter all of the required information into Form 3480. As such, attachments and appendices can be amended to the form and referenced within the form. Residual data analyses, toxicology studies, and environmental assessments are examples of documents that are frequently amended as attachments or appendices to FDA Form 3480. You may also notice a second form available on the web. This form, Form 3479, should be used for FCS formulations. For additional information on this form, please contact our office. A notifier currently has two options when submitting an FCN. There is the paper format and the electronic format. The paper format can include submitting 5 paper copies of the FCN or a CD-ROM of the notification along with the 5 paper copies. Alternatively, a notifier also has the option of submitting just 1 paper copy of the FCN along with a CD-ROM of the FCN. At this time, submitting a CD-ROM alone is not an acceptable option and will be considered an incomplete submission. Notifications should be addressed to the Notification Control Assistant at the address shown on this slide. In addition to submitting the original documents, notifiers should also submit a sanitized version of the FCN in which the commercial and trade secret confidential information has been redacted. This can be accomplished by drawing a box around the confidential information and stamping confidential near the box. The FDA highly recommends that notifiers submit a sanitized FCN so that information considered confidential will be emphasized and brought to the attention of the FDA. An option still in development for FDA is submitting an FCN via electronic format or e-filing through the FDA portal. FDA currently has draft guidance for the electronic filing of FCN submissions, whereby a notifier can electronically submit all the information related to the FCN in a way that is secure, confidential, user-friendly, and consistent with the current FCN format. At this time, it is recommended that notifiers discuss this option with FDA staff to assist in the process. Considering the statutory time frame and the need for efficiency in reviewing FCNs, FDA has divided the processing of food contact notifications into 4 discrete periods of activity. The review period for an FCN begins with the receipt and administrative processing of the FCN, followed by what is termed the Phase 1 review process, then the Phase 2 review process, and finally, conclusion with the final decision. Each of these phases will be discussed in more detail on the following slides. The receipt date of an FCN is established when the FCN arrives at the Office of Food Additive Safety at FDA, not the date of arrival at FDA itself. The FCN copies are distributed to the reviewers, while the first hard copy is scanned into FDA's internal electronic portal and distributed to the Consumer Safety Officer. The first step of the technical review, known as a Phase 1 meeting, is scheduled usually within 3 weeks from the receipt date. The first step in the technical review process is determining if FDA has the information necessary to perform the review. This is termed the Phase 1 review, and the goal or decision is to determine if the FCN is complete administratively. This determination is based on whether the chemistry, toxicology, and environmental data requirements have been met. Based on this review, FDA makes one of 3 possible decisions. 1, to accept the notification for full review under the FCN process, in which case an acknowledgement letter is issued. 2, to communicate to the notifier that deficiencies need to be addressed prior to acceptance of the FCN. Or 3, to not accept the FCN based on the agency's option for a food additive petition as previously discussed, or other reasons. A description of each of these letters is provided in the following slides. FDA sends the acknowledgement letter early in the review process to communicate to the notifier our understanding of the FCS and proposed use. The acknowledgement letter is usually sent to the notifier within 30 days of receipt of the FCN. This letter provides the initial contact between FDA and the notifier and assigns an FCN number. The letter confirms the FCS identity, manufacturer or supplier, intended use, and conditions of use, including limitations and specifications. The acknowledgement letter formally establishes the 120-day effective date of an FCN and also provides the notifier with the opportunity to clarify minor, non-substantive information. Once the acknowledgement letter is issued, the notification is considered accepted and proceeds to a full review within the 120-day review period. This review is known as a Phase 2 review, which I will discuss in greater detail later in this presentation. The second type of letter that could be generated after a Phase 1 review is a deficiency letter, which highlights the findings from FDA's initial or preliminary review of the FCN. This letter is usually sent to the notifier within 45 days of receipt of an FCN. This letter identifies minor and major deficiencies that should be addressed in order to ensure that the FCN is complete and acceptable and serves to formally document the agency's request for information, as well as provide the notifier a specific time frame in which a response is required. Requests for minor information include things such as points for clarification and missing or incorrect pages. In these cases, FDA would expect the information to be readily available to the notifier so that the notifier can easily provide a response. This is information that should be obtainable in less than 2 weeks. On the other hand, requests for major information includes failure to provide relevant and/or appropriate studies, missing raw analytical data and/or environmental component, and lack of data to support safety conclusions, safety calculations, technical effect, and/or stability. In such cases, a complete response may not be possible within the time allotted. If the notifier cannot respond within the allotted time frame, the notifier can voluntarily withdraw the FCN without prejudice and refile at a later date. Or FDA may send a non-acceptance letter ending the review of the FCN. As previously noted, FDA will generally provide the notifier with a brief period of time to supply the missing information or withdraw the FCN. If the deficiencies are not adequately addressed or the FCN is not withdrawn, a non-acceptance letter is issued. In addition, under 21 CFR, Section 170.100, subparagraph B, FDA may choose not to accept a notification for a use of an FCS that is the subject of a regulation in Parts 173 through 186, or that is the subject of an exemption under 21 CFR Section 170.39. As described earlier, under 21 CFR Section 170.100, subparagraph C, FDA may choose to not accept a notification if the proposed use will increase the dietary concentration to greater than or equal to 1 part per million, or to a level of 200 parts per billion in the case of a biocide, or when there exists a bioassay on the FCS that the agency has not reviewed and the study is not clearly negative for carcinogenicity. The issuance of a non-acceptance letter completes the review of this submission. If deficiencies in an FCN are addressed in a timely manner, FDA's determination regarding a time frame for a path forward on the submission is based on whether the information is considered substantive or non-substantive. Information determined to be substantive requires that the 120-day review clock start on the date when OFAS received a complete notification. If information is determined to be non-substantive, the 120-day clock starts with the original receipt date for the FCN. The effective date is always communicated to the notifier in the acknowledgement letter. During the Phase 2 review, FDA completes a full safety evaluation on the FCS and any other substances from the proposed use as specified in the FCN. If FDA completes the review of the submission and agrees that the FCS is safe for the intended use, a final letter is issued. This letter is not required by law. The final letter brings closure to the review process, lists the authorized notifier, manufacturer, and/or supplier, and the identity and use of the FCS. It also includes the effective date of the notification and provides the environmental impact decision for the FCN. Alternatively, if during Phase 2 review, the agency determines that the safe use of the FCS cannot be supported, these issues are conveyed to the notifier with the option to withdraw the notification without prejudice to future filing. If the notifier chooses not to withdraw, an objection letter is sent prior to the 120-day time frame. The content of the objection letter includes a statement that FDA objects to the marketing of an FCS. It describes in detail the agency's basis for objection and provides details on the additional information required to support the safety of the FCS for the intended use. The reasons FDA may object to an FCN are described under Section 409H of the Act and 21 CFR Section 170.104, subparagraph C of the regulations, and include that the FCN is incomplete because it does not comply with the general criteria for an FCN as described in 21 CFR Section 170.100. FDA may also object to an FCN because FDA does not agree that the notifier has demonstrated that the substance is safe under the intended conditions of use. Finally, FDA may object because a portion of the 120 days after FDA's receipt of the FCN occurs within a fiscal year for which the FCN program does not operate. Other aspects important to the FCN process include pre-notification consultations, also known as PNCs, and Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, requests. These have proven to be tools useful in the preparation of an FCN. Pre-notification consultations, or PNCs, are interactions between stakeholders and FDA prior to the submission of an FCN. These consultations can take several forms, such as letters or meetings, and there are many reasons for submitting a PNC. A PNC request may be sent to the agency via email, fax, or letter. Some examples are presented on this slide and include draft FCNs submitted for FDA's comments, meetings to discuss requirements, and recommendations to support a future submission, determining a path forward based on data already developed, and regulatory status. FDA also receives requests for information or the need for a discussion concerning the eligibility of a substance prior to its being considered for an FCN. For additional information or to initiate this process, please contact FDA. The Freedom of Information Act, known as FOIA, requires that all federal agencies make their information publicly available. A FOIA can request certain information in previously regulated food additive petitions or effective food contact notifications. All FOIA requests must be in writing and sent by mail or fax. FDA does not accept FOIA requests sent via email. For additional information on FOIA requests, please visit the FDA website at www.fda.gov. Select More Regulatory Information, followed by How to Make a FOIA Request. FDA will not release or disclose any information in the FCN during the 120-day review period. Once the FCN becomes effective after the 120-day review period, FDA's conclusion is made publicly available on our website in the Inventory of Effective Notifications. However, if the FCN was withdrawn and does not become effective, the information in the FCN will not be disclosed. If FDA objects to the FCN also becomes public knowledge. With regard to FOIA, information in the notification is not protected from disclosure after an FCN becomes effective, or if FDA objects to the FCN, unless it is trade secret or confidential commercial information. Once an FCN becomes effective after the 120-day review period, or is objected to, general information, safety and functionality data, and information incorporated by reference may be releasable through a FOIA request. Please note that trade secret and confidential commercial information is not releasable even after the FCN is effective. For additional information on any of the topics covered in this presentation, please contact FDA. Thank you.